For years, American policymakers have sounded the alarm.
Because you can see how close the Chinese...
The smaller number of
Filipino citizen is killed.
The U.S. and China into a Cold War.
How close are we to conflict? Or are they narratives designed to shape perceptions and perhaps even to justify confrontation?
It is possible that the security competition will lead to a hot war.
We dive into the South China Sea.
So this is also a message to the Philippines. Do you really want to fight? Can you win?
I'm hoping the South China Sea, which is not a very valuable place to be fighting over for two great powers.
We untangle the complexities of China-US relations.
I mean, extremist voices are dominating the space.
Ideologically, there's a jihad against China.
We uncover the history, geopolitics, and media shaping today's power dynamics.
There must be someone win more than the other side.
You always have the rising and fall of major powers. That's the rule of world history.
And we reveal what's at stake in the battle for truth and the path to coexistence.
U.S. and China must find some way to coexist rather than have a war.
When the Chinese pulled away,
tensions escalated within days with clashes between Chinese and Philippine vessels in the sea. Some would argue South China Sea now is much more dangerous than Taiwan because it has no ready mechanism to manage conflict there.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that the South China Sea is a very different matter, and China has disputes with countries like the Philippines that could easily lead to a shooting conflict between the Philippines on one side and the Chinese on the other. And as you know, the Americans have a treaty commitment to come to the aid of the Philippines. So the Americans could get dragged into a war or a shooting match between the Philippines and China.
We traveled to the South China Sea to speak with a China Coast Guard officer who experienced the escalating tensions firsthand.
今年9月至10月，我们连续在南海执行了长达75天的巡逻任务。
These reefs are key flashpoints of contention. At Renai Reef, the Philippines has kept a rusting World War II-era ship grounded since 1999 to assert territorial claims. Despite promises by previous administrations to remove it, the commitment remains unfulfilled.
目前在仁爱礁方向，菲律宾57号登陆舰一直坐滩在我们仁爱礁，15天至30天左右会为武器舰进行运补一次。不光是运送生活物资，甚至会夹带一些建筑材料，为坐滩进一步做好准备。 得到上级的允许，我们都可以同意它实施运补，但别不允许夹带一些建筑材料为武器舰进行加固。从专业性角度，我们也是按那个逐步升级的一个态度，先是对它进行喊话警告或者喊话提醒，
请调整航向，驶离我管辖海域，否则我将依法对你采取强制管控措施。菲律宾 vessel for。
再不劝阻，我们再进一步升级举措，避免这个突然的矛盾进行升级。
你们跟菲律宾的人员一面接触，感觉他们的人员是怎么样？
讲实话，都是不是非常专业的，操纵方面或者是国际避风规则方面，它都是不讲规则啊，盲目穿插你线索啊，进行一些危险动作、危险驾驶。对一个是不讲规矩的人，不知道他下步的动作，一些危险情况就不可避免。这张图片就是我们去2023年9月20号我们在应对非运补的时候啊，这个就是当时那个非尤拉扎5月的一个补给船，这是我们当时一线取证的照片。对。
哦，这个是媒体
这个你可以从那个非海警船上你看到甲板面上有大量的媒体人员
他就是故意带媒体人员来拍到，比如说故意想要拍摄一个中国海警来电他们的画面，
对，就想
宣传出咱们
我们以大欺小啊，对，事实上他是违规拦截啊、危险驾驶啊，甚至他采取一些冲撞措施，反而是我们在冲撞他，对我们进行煽草。菲律宾为武器舰运补动作越来越强势，甚至会携带相关的媒体进行宣传。
The more we dig into this, the clearer it gets. Western media isn't reporting, they are colluding with the Philippines to push a narrative. Look at it, in the last few years, negative stories about the South China Sea have spiked. But neutral ones, they haven't budged. That's not how media usually works. So what's going on?
We examined over 850,000 think tank articles, news reports, and social media posts from the US and Western countries from the first half of 2024. The results were striking. 73.4% of think tank articles, 74.2% of news reports, and an overwhelming 89.5% of social media posts portrayed China negatively. Who is driving this imbalance?
3 initiatives caught our attention. When you see videos flooding social media portraying China through narratives of coercion and illegality, that's coming from the Project A Campaign Plan for the South China Sea, initiated by the US Naval Institute.
That's us. Our reports on the South China Sea were targeted by Project Mayushu. It's another disinformation campaign by advocates of gray zone tactics, which are non-military measures aimed at undermining China's position. And their boss? Ray Powell, backed by the military-industrial complex.
The entire U.S. treaty and alliance and treaty structure is built on credibility.
The last one is the Transparency Initiative, a strategy spearheaded by Manila to name and shame China Coast Guard operations by enlisting Western journalists to document incidents and release footage portraying Chinese forces as aggressors.
南海问题啊，其实话语权争夺非常严峻。美国的南海政策已经不再中立。20年7月13号，当时的国务卿蓬佩奥仲裁裁决出炉4周年的时候，发表了一个国务卿声明：谁在南海问题上面与中国对抗，美国就支持谁。
我们发现很多菲律宾的民众在中国的媒体的下面留言，他们的一个主要观点就是说，就黄岩岛来讲，那个地方是菲律宾的专属经济区，您怎么看这个问题？
中菲在南海还没有一个界限清晰的、毫无争议的专属经济区。在2012年黄岩岛对峙之后，6月1号在新加坡香格里拉对话，我当时和菲律宾的当时的国防部长加世明，还有一个美国的一个参议员，我们3个人进行一次对话。我当时是带了菲律宾出版的2000几年的官方地图，我就给他的国防部长看，我说你出版的官方地图黄岩岛在你的国土范围之外啊，怎么黄岩岛成为你的国土主权部分呢？
专属经济区难道不是海洋法公约规定的吗？还是说要双方协定？
是的，但是海洋相向和相邻国家的专属经济划定，必须要通过协商方式。你依据你非法控制的中国的南沙群岛部分岛礁，或者黄岩岛在这中沙群岛，然后来主张专属经济区，单方面宣布专属经济区里面位于，但是你违背了一个国际法的一个基本原则，陆地统治海洋，你不能说我的陆地这个岛礁在你的专属经济区里边就是你的领土，它这个本末倒置了。第二个就是邻近原则，你靠近我就是我的，所以这个是荒唐的。夏威夷和这个关岛离美国那么远，那怎么成为美国的领土呢？当时的阿基诺夫人这个讲了，菲律宾离中国也很近啊。这个是民国时期的一本地理教科书，第一次出版是1936年，民国25年。南沙群岛在那个时候是叫团沙群岛。美国人出版的地图，麦克兰利公司出版的是1992年出版的，它叫《世界地图册》， 在这里边，南沙群岛它用的是汉语拼音南沙 Island (China)， 西沙群岛汉语拼音(China)。这是意大利传教士利玛窦带到日本去，日本人又把它翻译成中文的世界地图万里长沙，在这里利玛窦的地图400多年前的。
National ruling against Beijing over conflicting claims to territory. Beijing has ignored a 2016 decision by the Hague-based
Permanent Court of Arbitration supported the case brought by the Philippines.
The tribunal decision was clear on its stand.
The Philippines has propagated the 2016 South China Sea arbitration to bolster its claims.
仲裁庭是不合法的，就是仲裁庭，你成立仲裁庭对菲律宾提起的所谓的仲裁没有管辖权。海洋法公约管不到领土争议和划界主张的。划界主张，中国在2006年，我们根据海洋法公约第298条，涉及到专属经济划界、历史性权利、这个军事行动、专属性执法这一类的争议，中国不接受管辖。
China, the Philippines, Brunei, Malaysia all have competing claims over territory in the South China Sea. Why is the Philippines escalating tensions?
The Philippines, with the help of American lawyers, took China to compulsory arbitration. So China saw a trap. If you begin to accept that you have to argue why you can opt out, then you cannot opt out after that. So China said, no, I'm not taking part. So what did they do? They said, okay, if you don't want to take part, then I will appoint judges on your behalf, and I will make your case on your behalf. So China didn't want to take part for understandable reasons. China was new to this game. So the Filipinos feel that now they've got UNCLOS on their side, and the Americans are, of course, egging them on.
We could see very clearly a hidden hand behind. That is none other than the United States, and of course being aided by Japan to a certain extent. But this certainly is not going to do the entire region anything good. Well, in fact, this has been habitually their practice, their norms. If you were to trace back to the origin of conflict or dispute rather, then I must say that prior to the American intervention in this particular issue, there had been some kind of settlement and mutual understanding between Beijing and Manila over the issue.
China prefers the fruit to ripen on its own and not to pluck it. If you pluck it, it's sour, but if it ripens on its own, it'll be a very sweet fruit. So this is also a message to the Philippines. Do you really want to fight? Can you win? The danger for the Filipinos is this, that you think you can make use of the Americans, but in the end, instead of the Americans playing on your chessboard, you become a pawn on the American chessboard.
The South China Sea is just one piece of a bigger game, where the US sees China as a growing threat that needs to be contained.
Well, I think that the United States is principally interested in containing China. I think the United States fears the fact that China is becoming more powerful and that it is not a status quo power in East Asia. It thinks that it controls the South China Sea and it wants to dominate not only the South China Sea but the East China Sea. And this makes the Americans extremely nervous.
China does not conquer the United States. China does not send Navy ships to the United States. But why does the US politicians keep talking about China as enemy?
They believe if China do not grow so fast, and they will have no problem to maintain their global leadership or the unipolar sister configuration.
In my conception, the US and China are inevitable Thucydidean rivals. That is, as long as China is intent upon becoming everything it can be, I mean, that seems to me natural. So as long as that's happening, and as long as the US is determined to be the predominant power, this is going to be a rivalry between two states that have different conceptions of themselves.
What's the end goal of the US strategy against China?
People don't know what their end goal is. A few, again, people outside the government say, well, we should bring down the Chinese communist regime. Well, we've tried that in Cuba, Baghdad, Kabul, and haven't been very successful. Now we're going to try China? I think that's a little unrealistic.
Ideologically, there's a jihad against China. China is the enemy. China is an entity that needs to be stopped, through any and all means. And frankly, China is being bullied in the court of public opinion. And
consensus in Washington right now is anti-China.
Yeah, I think that's true, at least in political Washington, yes, definitely. And I don't, hope to see that kind of extends to average American people or average Chinese people.
Well, I think hypocrisy is an outstanding feature of U.S. foreign policy. They say one thing, do another. Okay, that has been the typical style of U.S. foreign policy.
Center for American Studies.
What do China-U.S. relations look like in real life? Professor Wu Xinbo engaged in a debate with a group of exchange students from Harvard.
Because, I studied the U.S. policies with China, so I read a lot of U.S. official documents and rhetoric. So basically, they say, "Oh, China is America's primary strategic competitor." Okay, China is America's most serious geopolitical rivalry. So, to what extent ordinary people, young people like you, share this kind of, concern about China, given your experience in China, even though still, brief. Yes, go ahead.
I think in the U.S. they have a very harsh and critical opinion of China, and I think being here has changed the way I think about it. I think being immersed in the environment, you get to see the lives of people, and that it's just very different than hearing about it online and reading it through articles. But it's been a very cool experience.
Mm-hmm. Yes, please.
Yeah. I don't know that my view has changed too much about the risk China poses towards the U.S. But my general sentiment is that the U.S. is a lot more worried about China than China is worried about the U.S. in terms of at least politics, or at least speaking to young people, it doesn't seem as antagonistic as is often portrayed by U.S. media and probably by Chinese media as well. It doesn't seem like it's not a daily obsession.
Today, American young people come to China, they are surprised and even shocked to see, how far ahead China is ahead of the US, in terms, let's say, EV, right? Development of green energy industry, and also e-commerce. All these kind of things give them a very different impression of China, different from what they read about and heard.
It's not just academic exchanges reshaping perceptions. In Shanghai, waves of international tourists are arriving, jumping on China's newly rolled out visa-free transit policy, all excited to explore a fresh side of the country.
China, thanks to the new visa system.
We just arrived yesterday.
See, this is impression. A lot of people, very peaceful. No crime on the street. Yeah. It's clean. Everything is clean. It's not like in Europe.
It's really cool. Yes. A lot of people and it's really crowded, but it's still very quiet and not noisy, and I really like that.
Because we don't speak any Chinese. Obviously, sometimes communication, we might have some challenges, but technology has made it so easy, so helpful.
To me, one of the biggest misconceptions is the appearance of China. Because in a lot of Western countries, there's very negative views on the appearance. I think one thing I would really want to point out is how green it is, which I find amazing. It's really something to look up to for a lot of countries. In the streets, you have trees everywhere.
Somehow, I think people in the West feel that the Chinese people are different. And candidly, frankly, they're not. And I think that can only be explained through either meeting people face to face, talking with them, hanging out with them, visiting them, seeing how they live, or through watching films about them. Oh, let's go to China. Nobody's coming to China anymore because China has been demonized. When people come, it changes their minds almost immediately.
There is lots of preconceptions about China, about stereotypes. Today we're going to find out the truth. The fastest trains, everything's modern.
Welcome to the most mind-blowing city. Trains run through buildings. Oh my gosh, that is insane.
What the hell?
Hello, all my friends from
TikTok. Sense of global connection, while for the Chinese, they provide a unique opportunity to break stereotypes.
Being on Rednote is so funny to me because before this, the Americans and the Chinese never really had a way to directly converse.
What's up, Rednote?
I'll cut you a deal. If you teach us all Mandarin, I'll do your English homework. I swear to God.
My favorite part is the cat tax. We really love the cat tax that you paid. And I just can't stop thinking like, isn't this what the world should be like? What I'm trying to say is that no matter where you're from, why you're here, you're all welcomed.
China is not a perfect country. No country is. But in my travels around China, in 2024, everyone is living a better, far, far better life than they lived as children, as far better than their parents lived, and infinitely better than their grandparents lived. Whether we like the Communist Party or we hate the Communist Party, that is attributable to the Communist Party, and they have achieved something extraordinary with the help and the hard work and the industry and innovation of the Chinese people.
Your films sometimes were also attacked by the West as a propaganda.
You know, the problem is in an ideologically polarized world, if you're not for us, you're against us. I mean, I'm from the West. They are my tribe, if you will. I just don't happen to admire the way they set themselves up in opposition to the rise, to the renaissance of modern China. I think that's just foolish and wooden-headed. China is going to determine its own future, and I think we need to respect that and we need to embrace it.
In a world where narratives of competition and conflict between China and the US often dominate, these stories of collaboration and shared humanity remind us that cooperation is not only possible, but essential.
By fostering mutual understanding and preserving the positive aspects of our shared history, we can work towards a future where competition doesn't preclude cooperation, and where the realities of our interactions reflect the best of our shared values.